Why does any of this exist at all, rather than nothing? It's wild to think that we still haven't answered this question, the biggest of all questions. We just go on with our lives while this remains a mystery. I'm Chris Carroll, a scientist, writer and atheist, and I've been reading a book which claims to have the answer. So this is the book, God, the Science, the Evidence, and it's a global best-selling book. And the recent chapter that I've been reading is about fine-tuning, which in short is the discussion of why is there a universe, where did it come from, and why is it set up to have the certain physical laws, the constants and values that it does. So this book goes through around 20 odd numbers, which are all so specific. And if you were to change them in any way, even just a tiny amount, you would no longer have a universe where stars and planets could form or that life could ever arise, as far as we know based on the way we see life today. I'll give some specific examples to help illustrate this. The value of the gravitational force is so specific that if you were to change it at all, you would no longer have things like planets or stars forming in the universe. Furthermore, the value of the strong force that holds atomic nuclei together is set as such that if it were different, we wouldn't have atoms and molecules, and we wouldn't have meaningful structures or life as we know it today. I used to think that the fine-tuning argument was purely something to justify the idea of a creator or God behind the universe who set these values as we see them today. However, it's not just an argument between religion and science. Even within science and in physics, there is debate as to why these laws have the values that they do. It does sort of demand explanation, and the answers are hard to come by. But if you'd like to know more about that, I would recommend Sean Carroll's podcast on fine-tuning. About an hour and a half, he goes through all these different constants and laws, and I'll leave a link to that in the video description, and I would highly recommend that if you're interested. And probably, if anyone's thought about this before, the idea that will be shouting out at you as you watch this video is the idea of a multiverse. So this is one of the explanations physicists have given, is that this isn't the only universe. There are multiple universes, and maybe each of these can have different physical laws and constants. In this case, the only reason we can ask the question, why is there something rather than nothing, or why are we here, is because this specific universe exists with those constants. The authors of this book didn't take kindly to the idea of the multiverse. Of course, it's very hard for us to show what exists outside of this universe. It might be eternally impossible for us to do that. But there are reasons and observations made by scientists that have led them to speculate the multiverse. It's not coming out of nowhere. But the authors here are not very keen on the idea at all. And it's fair, there are other scientists who don't see as much merit in the multiverse as we might expect. Ultimately, though, when we're talking about things that exist outside of our instant reality, that is a very difficult thing to do. And so by inserting God as the entity which would set those constants, that might be a fallacy which we would call the God of the gaps, which is where we have the limits of our knowledge at this current time. And because we don't know something, we insert God at that point. You know, God was once thought of as creating the Earth, but we have geological and planetary solar system evolution explanations for that, so God gets moved further back. I recommended a science podcast, so on the other end of the divide, I'll recommend a book by the philosopher Philip Goff called Why. And he talks about the fine-tuning quite a lot, and he talks about it from the perspective of Bayesian probability. So it's an interesting angle. He was an atheist, and he has since become some sort of Christian, as he would describe it, in recent years, because he finds the fine-tuning argument so compelling. I personally don't. I still think that we need to be humble and recognise that there are limits to our knowledge and technologies in terms of what we can learn about reality, and I'm open-minded to what we'll find.